How can you deal with exposure to COVID in the workplace or establish work from home guidelines when they're needed? These are some of the questions we're going to be talking about today here at Level Up Thursday, brought to you by Mobile Growth Association. I'm your host, Peggy Ann Saltz, mobile analyst, tech consultant, senior contributor to Forbes.com. And we get together here on Select Thursdays, here on Level Up Thursdays, bring you lessons, learnings, ways to become a better marketer, build a better business. And that's what it's about today. It's all about the latter. So a major challenge in the era of COVID is the topic of today's talk, operating your business in the COVID-19 era. My guest has been advising clients in multiple industries almost non-stop since the pandemic began. He started out, helping them out of the shutdown, and then it's helping them to reopen, and all of that with lawful, practical protocols, doing it by the book, the way it has to be. He's an experienced trial attorney, lectures, consults on a wide variety of employment-related matters. It's great to have you, Travis Gamotes, attorney at Jeffrey Mengels. So great, you're coming here to share your invaluable advice today. Fantastic to have you. Where are you based, by the way?
Thank you. Thank you for that great introduction, Peggy. And yes, it has been quite a 6-month period of nonstop work. Getting people prepared for what's to come and dealing with what's transpired. I'm with the firm of Jeffrey Mengels. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I'm licensed to practice throughout the state, and I've been licensed, or I've been admitted to practice in on matters throughout the country, and so we really have a nationwide reach to our practice here, based in California.
Well, you came with the deck. I'm really happy because I thought, okay, we can do this. We can do sort of just riffing and talking because there's so many questions to ask. But you came with the deck. You're going to share some insights. And this is important because, it's about tech companies here at Mobile Growth Association. But this is about all businesses. So everyone has something to learn here. So I'm not going to hold you back. Dive right in, Travis. And I will ask questions along the way since this isn't going to be sort of Q&A at the end. And I've got some questions through social media as well. So let's do it. Let's get it started.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So let's talk about the remote work environment. I know many in tech have been working remotely long before we found ourselves in this pandemic. But there are practicalities and legalities of working remotely that everyone needs to follow. The remote work environment doesn't leave the labor and employment laws at the door. In fact, they don't change at all. So it's crucial for employers and employees. If there are people on the call in the webinar who are employers, this applies to them. But even those who are working remotely as an employee, I think we'll all find some valuable takeaways from understanding the legalities. So first of all, what we have to understand is whenever there are hourly employees working remotely, those hours need to be tracked just as if they would be clocking in at a normal workplace. So we strongly recommend that all hours be tracked for our hourly employees. And it's not a bad idea to do so even for our salaried employees so that we have a sense of when they're actually performing work for the business. So digital time cards, a record from the employees on a daily basis of the hours that they're working. And another important element to that is that meal periods, which are mandated in more states than people realize. Certainly California requires them. They're also mandated in Nevada, Colorado, Minnesota, Illinois, New York, all the New England states, and all the Pacific Northwest states, Washington, Oregon. All these states mandate meal periods be taken on a daily basis. There are certain exceptions on the given state, but it's a nationwide issue for the most part, and even certain states like you wouldn't think, like West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, North Dakota. These are states that all require meal periods. So those have to be recorded as well. So tracking hours is of critical importance even in remote work. Tracking productivity. Now that's an area where a lot of employers who have shifted from the real world environment to the remote work environment have had problems, because they're not used to their workers not coming physically to the working environment. So how do you track productivity of your employees? And so this applies for everybody. And what we recommend is a weekly self-report. Ask your employees, especially those who haven't been working remotely much before, but certainly anyone could be asked to do this, is to provide a weekly report of what it is that they've been doing that week. Maybe not an hour by hour breakdown, but just a list of what they've done, a list of how much time those tasks have taken, perhaps a list of people who they've worked with, or clients and customers that they've been interacting with, just so that you have a sense that work is being done even as they've shifted to this remote environment.
So I have a question right here just before you get on, so we keep with these thoughts, because first of all, it's fascinating. I'm self-employed, so I sort of track myself, but what is it that is acceptable as a tracking tool? I mean, is it just like Toggle? I use Timular, which is this really cool little sort of like Rubik's Cube thing you can turn, and you know what you're doing. So it's a little bit more gamification, right? But this is what I do for myself. What is legally acceptable? Is that the standard, or is there something else?
Well, the interesting thing is, the legal standards for tracking productivity, there really aren't any specific, rules. I mean, it is required. If an employer is going to require it, they can require it on any platform that they want, and they can require any level of specificity. I mean, some employers do want to have, by the minute report on what's actually being done. Just as being self-employed, you sometimes need to justify that for your clients. So there's nothing that prohibits an employer from requiring that exact same level of specificity and detail. The key is that if we're tracking the productivity of hourly employees, the time that the employee is tracking their work is also chargeable as time as working hours. So the pitfall is having employees who are paid by the hour tracking their productivity when they're not on the clock. That's illegal. So they need to be paid for that time tracking their activity. So if you want them to spend a lot of detail in tracking their activity, that's fine. Just make sure they're on the clock to do it. When you're dealing with salaried exempt employees, obviously they're not being paid by the hour. So that's I think the line you have to decide is when is the detail actually slowing down the actual work that needs to be done, right? So that's sort of the happy medium that needs to be found. And it's also one other area is that if you're going to be tracking different people in different ways, and different workers at different levels of specificity, you have to make sure that you're doing that in a way that's fair. If for example, if certain employees are being asked to create greater detail in their in tracking their productivity, you should at least be able to establish that they've had issues in the past, and that's why this greater detail is being justified. Some sort of justification why you're treating different people differently, or maybe different departments can be treated differently, but you don't want to be for example, if you decided that you're going to make your male employees track your productivity to the second, because but your female employees are allowed to give a 3-line email every week saying what they did, that could be seen as an issue. All right.
Well, let's go on with responsiveness. That's a big question. I think that's about the idea of being on call. Am I correct?
Well, exactly. So responsiveness is interesting because, again, you've got the distinction between the hourly worker and the salaried exempt employee. So your hourly employee cannot be expected to be responsive unless they're on the clock. And so if you are having your employees, on call 24/7, where you're expecting them to respond to you within, 20, 30 minutes, that's compensable time. So you have to be very careful in the level of responsiveness that you require of your hourly employees. Now, certainly, when they are, within their scheduled hours, their hours of work, you can require responsiveness. You can require that they pick up their answer their phone, respond to emails. But once they are off the clock, once they are no longer being paid, they do not have that same level of responsiveness. And so the employer needs to decide, and this can be done on an employee by employee basis for their hourly employees, if the employee, once they're done with their 8-hour shift or whatever it is for the day, if you don't want them to look at anything until they're back on the shift the next morning or the next Monday morning, whatever it may be, then they need to know that they aren't to respond to emails, that they're not to respond to calls, and ideally, that if they're being asked to work, you can, still ask your hourly employees to be responsive, but give them time. Never require responsiveness within anything less than 1 hour as a safe guideline. If an employee is on call and you need them to respond within an hour, then you only have to pay them for that time when they are in fact responding. That whole time, that on-call period, is not compensable if you give them that hour response time. If you say, look, if I email you, if I call you, you need to get back to me within 15 minutes, then that whole window of time where they're under that tight restriction of responsiveness is compensable time. So you would have to pay them for all those hours. Now, it's different, of course, for a salaried exempt employee, where they're not being paid by the hour. They're receiving their salary for the week, and they're expected to fulfill their obligations during that time. So for those employees who are truly exempt and not misclassified, which is a whole separate issue, you can require responsiveness without having to pay them anything extra because you've paid them their salary for that week.
All right.
And then, of course, for those employees who are, whether they're exempt or not, if we're finding that they're not being responsive, I've advised several clients who've been very frustrated because, during the workday, what they've intended to be the workday, they're not getting the responsiveness that they would expect from their employees, and they've wanted to discipline them, to write them up for that, and of course that can be done. But we want to be cautious. We certainly don't want to discipline our hourly employees for failing to be responsive during non-working hours. So we don't want to give them discipline that hurts your case. And then, of course, the question is, how do we give this discipline? The tradition of calling the employee into the HR office with the supervisor,
that's
not going to happen in the remote work environment. And so I have had clients who said, look, I'd like to do this on a Zoom call. And so, we've literally, we've morphed to that for these disciplinary meetings, where you still have the 3 people there. You want to have the supervisor giving the discipline, some third party there, or, someone in the company, obviously, but a human resources person or somebody, some other level member of management to be in that meeting. And then, of course, the written aspect of the discipline can then be emailed to the person, the signature requested and returned, just as you would in a normal face-to-face meeting. So that we have seen that happening.
I have a question with responsive, not a really long question, just to shoot these in here, sort of rapid fire questions for you, Travis, and maybe you're getting to this, right? But what I'm hearing about most, and I also have people that I work with, that I employ freelancers, so probably it's a little bit different, but that responsiveness, that's probably has many different meanings right now, because if the whole idea is, we have to fix our lunch ourselves, it takes longer, or I'm fixing lunch for myself and family members, etc. Responsiveness takes on a different meaning entirely. Does that enter into this? Or are there ways to say, look, if someone is a caregiver, what are you going to do? Right,
exactly. And that's an excellent question, Peggy. But here's Here's the bottom line, I mean, yes, employers need to be more flexible in this COVID, post-COVID, or in the middle of the COVID era, during this pandemic, and I think even beyond, as we'll talk about later. But yes, there is an acknowledgement that employees and freelancers, people who are doing work for us, who are working from home, they might have issues, childcare issues, like you mentioned, that can be emergent. If you've got a screaming baby, or an elderly, a parent who is in need of care, it's really not appropriate for us to demand the specific responsiveness. So understanding the needs of the workforce, and the fact that they are being pulled in different directions now, that when they would come into the office and leave all that behind, that's just not the reality. And so we understand that in the remote world, you can't simply lock yourself in your home office and ignore, your 9-year-old beating up on your 7-year-old. It just doesn't work like that. Got it. So you need to be flexible. Okay. Absolutely. And look, as a labor and employment lawyer, no presentation on the remote workforce and the workplace in general would be complete without at least touching on the misuse of independent contractors. Now, especially in the tech world, there's been a huge growth of the use of independent contractors instead of employees. And I can't tell you how many of my clients have said, "Oh, well, I don't have any employees. I just use independent contractors." Even my secretary, she's an independent contractor. So simply calling somebody an independent contractor doesn't solve your problems as an employer. California passed a law effective the 1st of this year, AB 5, that has truly changed the landscape of when it's proper to treat somebody as an independent contractor. We've all heard about the Ubers and the Lyft disputes, them characterizing their drivers as independent contractors. And, we were literally a day from having Uber and Lyft leave the state of California if these court decisions were weren't going to be stayed by an upper court, and they were put on pause. There's going to be a ballot measure in November that might could hopefully decide the issue for the Ubers and Lyfts and DoorDashes and of the world. But for the rest of us, we have to be very, very clear that we can't just call somebody an independent contractor and call it a day. We have to make sure that they're properly being treated as such, and that legally they can be. I mean, if you have a business, you can't just treat the people who do the work for you as independent contractors. You have to either have an exception or bring them on as employees. So that needs to be very carefully considered, and ideally with experienced legal counsel. Now, California is certainly the most restrictive in when you can deem somebody an independent contractor, but there are federal guidelines under the FLSA, the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, that apply nationwide. So wherever you're operating, simply deeming somebody an independent contractor because you think it's going to solve some problems for you, that could be creating them. So always be careful with that. Okay. All right, let's move on to our second topic, the protocols and pitfalls when returning to the non-virtual working environment. Obviously, we're starting to see this. I was talking to my brother on the East Coast, and we are opening up at different levels and at different speeds throughout the country, but we are opening up. I was advised that I can finally get a haircut in Los Angeles County starting today, so we're very excited about that. But there are protocols and pitfalls that we need to be mindful of. Temperature checks. So for many of us, returning to the workforce means getting a daily temperature check. I have several clients, especially clients where they're interacting with the public. Some clients who have supermarkets where they actually make every customer get a temperature check before they're allowed in. But certainly the employees need to have a daily temperature check. My hospital clients, they're requiring a daily temperature check. My food service clients, they're requiring a daily temperature check. My food manufacturing and facilities, they're also requiring daily temperature checks of their employees. Is that going to be required for every type of working environment? No, certainly not. But I think every employer needs to determine, is that going to be something I'm going to do? And if they do it, it needs to be done on a daily basis, and ideally getting everybody that daily temperature check. But it doesn't. I think for the normal office environment, probably not. The normal tech environment, probably not. It's more mandated for those where you're going to have a lot of interaction with the public, and like I mentioned, healthcare, food service, that sort of those environments. But what about a wellness certification? We've all seen these signs when we enter a grocery store. Do not enter if you've experienced any of these symptoms. What I'm advising my clients in tech and in other fields, where there is a return to the office or to the workspace, to have at least a weekly certification where they basically answer those types of questions, that they haven't experienced any symptoms, that they haven't been exposed to anybody who's experienced these symptoms, that they haven't, that they aren't currently waiting, the results of a COVID test that's been ordered by a healthcare professional, and that they're not currently under quarantine. So simple, asking them to respond to this questionnaire can take 2 minutes or even less. But that's something that we are seeing, and I'm recommending for my clients that are bringing their workforce back into the workforce, into a real office environment. There's also
probably also, Travis, I imagine that's because later on you can say, look, I certified this, so therefore, it is on paper, it's for real. This gives us a starting point, an ending point in a dispute.
Exactly.
Got it.
Very much so. And then also, this is an important aspect of returning to the real world environment. Whether we're there now or whether we get there, in the near future, we need to have flexibility for those who are not able to return right away. Until there are going to be those who are in high risk. There are going to be those who care for people who are at high risk, and to mandate that they return to work before we've received the COVID-19 all clear, and hopefully that doesn't last until it's now time for COVID-20 or COVID-21. We have to be mindful that there are going to be those people who are still who are able to if they can work from home, and they are high risk, or they are caring for those who are high risk. We need to be flexible so that can be decided on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't simply mean that if somebody says, hey, I feel like I'm high risk, I don't want to come back, that we have to abide by every request, but there needs to be flexibility. And it's a violation not to be flexible in those situations.
I have a question, because I'm based in Europe, so it's a different world, right? In many ways. I'm based in Germany, it gets even better, right? So everyone has a right in this country. And there are many people who are like, I'm not going back to work because I'm not going in the subway. I could get sick. And that's just the statement. And I don't know how it's going to work out, because there is no word on that. But there are people who just say, I'm not going to fly, I'm not going to get in mass transport. It's not going to happen. What is that? What is the situation here? Because, you're talking about people who are at risk. What if you just are concerned you might become at risk?
Sure. And so here's where you have two very important decisions to make. First of all, can that work continue to be performed remotely? So if the person can perform their work remotely, until we have, some, dramatic changes in, vaccination and what have you, where we feel that we are in a post-COVID, I won't even call it a post-COVID-19, because like I said, it could be COVID-20 or COVID-21. When we feel that we're in a post-COVID world, then maybe we would revisit this. But while we're still in that world, people who have those concerns, if they can work from home, they should be allowed to continue to work from home. Now there are going to be, but if people who cannot do their work remotely, if they're not willing to sometimes it's bad news for them. But an employer in the United States, at least, like you say, it is different in different countries, but certainly in the United States, they have certain paid sick leave that they'd be allowed to take. we had the Family First Act mandated 2 weeks of paid sick leave for everybody in the country for those who work with an employer with 500 employees or less. There's state mandates throughout in many states of more additional paid sick leave. So, but once they've exhausted their paid sick leave, if they're not able to perform their work and they're not willing to whether it's legitimate or contrived to put their health and safety at risk by coming into the workplace, you don't have to pay them. They don't have a right to be paid simply because they can't work. So that's the situation.
Got it. And as you said, for tech workers, we're pretty much a remote tribe anyway. So I would imagine, a little bit outside of this, but do continue. I don't want to hold you up because we have more slides and more questions.
Yeah, exactly. So I just want to be obviously if we find that there's an employee who is required to self-quarantine or mandated to work from home, that kind of just answered the questions I was just giving you a response to. Yes, you do have some obligation for paid time off, but those are limited. And after those 2 weeks, or in some states, 3 weeks are done, then if they can't work remotely, you don't have to keep paying them, even if it's a COVID related reason why they're unable to work. All right. Okay. A couple other items to keep in mind in the workplace. Of course, social distancing and needs to be maintained. Conference rooms that maybe held 10 people before, we shouldn't allow more than 3 or 4 in those rooms. If we have people returning to the office, have advanced cleaning protocols and have hire people to do this cleaning to keep the surfaces clean. Although obviously there's been some change in our guidance from the Centers for Disease Control on the effectiveness of that, but we should be following federal guidelines with respect to cleaning protocols. The employer should make sure that personal protective equipment is available. They don't necessarily have to hand them out to everybody. People should be encouraged to bring their own. But if somebody forgot their mask, there should be masks available at the workplace for them to use free of charge. And of course, we recommend hand sanitizer. We have our trusty bottle of Jeffrey Mangle's hand sanitizer. Everyone got one. Not a bad idea to have hand sanitizing stations put up.
New kind of swag there, Travis.
Yeah, exactly. Very nice. Exactly. And then of course for the workspaces themselves need to be modified. If you had people working in close proximity, then that needs to be modified, while we're still dealing with this issue.
Okay.
And then finally, is it going to be a return to normal, or will there be a new normal? Obviously, I think, there's going to be an ongoing impact of the post-COVID world. We're not, I don't think it's possible for us to go to a pre-COVID world. There have been changes in employee attitude. Those who were told, nope, you cannot work from home, have now been able to prove that, look, I've been able to work from home and I've been productive, and my work hasn't slipped at all. So we're going to see a lot more employees insisting that they work from home, and it's not going to be hard for them to find some type of justification that gives them legal protection to work from home. I have one good friend of mine. He worked at E-Trade, which they mandated, and this is obviously pre-COVID, that you have to come into work every day. Our E-Trade employees, even though it's simply on the phone and by a computer, they were mandated to come into their little E-Trade office. Then of course COVID hit, and they went from you're mandated to work into the office every day to the office is shut. You are not permitted to come to this. So what he took advantage of, and he might even be on this call, he was invited, I doubt it, but it's possible. His girlfriend lives in Vilnius, Lithuania. So he decided, well, great, if I don't have to come into the office, I will work from Vilnius. So he has been living it up in Vilnius. They don't have a COVID world in Vilnius. They think that, for whatever reason, and there hasn't been an outbreak there, but there have been places on the planet that haven't really been practicing social distancing, and they haven't had to pay a price for that.
Yeah.
So that's been one of
Yes.
them. But you're going to see changes in the employee attitude. But you're also going to see changes in the employer's attitude, goals for its workforce. Maybe we don't need to have the large office space when so many of us can work remotely. Maybe we could change on, reduce the square footage of our leases. Maybe customers are now used to having, these virtual visits from our employees. So we don't need to mandate, in-person contact as much. So there will be there'll be shifting employer goals from all of this as well. And of course, with a broader virtual workforce, that creates a broader employee pool. You don't need to be relying on those who live a commuting distance from your physical office or offices. So I think this will be a good thing for employers, across the country, is that they now recognize that, having an employee who lives out of state or even in a different country can still be a valid asset and a valid member of the team. And the fact that they're not commuting, for some of us who live in LA, of course, an hour-long commute in the Bay Area, an hour-long commute in many cities, in the United States is sort of, par for the course.
Counterproductive.
Yeah,
Absolutely
exactly.
counterproductive. Yeah.
Exactly. So now we have employees who, can devote their work day, for the benefit of the employer, as opposed to having to waste time in traffic. So I think that there are some real positive changes that even once we're in a post-COVID world, we can take. There are some takeaways that we can, some positives and silver linings we can take from this cloud that we've been working under for the last 6+ months.
I have a question, because we talk about being unprecedented times, right? All the time. But unprecedented means something different in your business, right? So I'm wondering, do you see that this is going to be one of those things where as we get back to normal, as you say, for example, we might say, hey, I don't need that lease, or I want to change that lease, or, you can give reason and say, look, things happen, this is different. What is going to happen? Are we all going to end up in court? I mean, it might be good for you, Travis, but, it sort of stalls the system if we're going back to the next normal or whatever it is. And we need to make these changes, but the constructs that are there aren't going to let us be that flexible. So what's going to happen here? I mean, it's hard to say, but I would like to hear it from a legal perspective, right?
Certainly, and that's an excellent question. And believe me, I get that question from my clients, almost on a daily basis. It's like, and we've basically, the bottom line is that there has to be flexibility on all sides, because there's certain certain businesses out there, and I won't name them, but some of these shared working spaces that have popped up, in many cities around the country. There's one in particular that has been completely inflexible. And even though, when there was literally quarantines in these cities where you could not come into a shared workspace, this one business decided that they would still hold you to your lease and automatically deduct your lease from whatever credit card they had on file. So I literally had clients cancel credit cards to stop these entities from their inflexibility. So that's one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, there's plenty of laws that have been passed, not nationwide yet, although, we just saw there was a nationwide edict by the CDC on forbearance of rent for employees earning less than for anybody who earns less than $100,000 a year as far as paying for their household rent. So is there an equivalent to that in the commercial real estate world? Well, in many jurisdictions, including LA, there have been ordinances, laws passed that have allowed even commercial businesses to have rent forbearance. So we are seeing some laws coming in that are mandating those changes. But that said, there's nothing that allows you to simply rip up your lease and say, hey, we had COVID, and so now, it's time to sit down and renegotiate a new one. But that said, there still is, there's still an opportunity for resolution. We have an entire real estate department. They're almost as busy as the labor department dealing with these types of issues as well.
And well, it's just been, invaluable, really. We've got a lot of rules about what to do as things are opening up, what to expect as they open up. Probably quite a few different laws, different approaches. What I'm hearing here is a need for flexibility, massive change, but also a massive opportunity perhaps to work differently, working from home and enlarging the workforce. You've given us some contact details that I'm reading right here, Travis. I mean, I'm just curious. You lecture, you're out there. You're not just an attorney in the office. You're out there contributing to the conversation. Is there any place where our audience might go and say, look at the real workbook for how to return back to work, or maybe blogging, or your insights elsewhere? How might they keep up with you? We have the contact details here, but
sure.
Have you shared your insights elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best place to go, so you see on my email address, it ends at jmbm.com. That is my law firm's website. And that is where we have an amazing repertoire of helpful information, not just from the employment law perspective. We're a full service law firm. So as I mentioned, our real estate department, they're very busy in providing advice to clients, and there's a lot available for non-clients that's available at the jmbm.com website. We've had we have specialists for those who are getting PPP loans, so we can navigate basically any aspect, any element of this pandemic. We have attorneys who are able to do that, and so that is an excellent resource there. And of course, if you look me up once you're at that website, you'll see what I've done and what we've offered through the labor department. A lot of what we've done in the labor department, we all collaborate on those, but there's a lot of very helpful COVID-19 information specifically from our department available on the jmbm.com website.
Well, you've been very open. You've been very sharing. I can't thank you enough for taking the time, Travis. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. And of course, being a lawyer, it would be incomplete for me to just confirm that this is not legal advice. This is for general information purposes.
Okay.
But if you do need a top-notch labor and employment attorney or a lawyer in any other of these fields, reach out to me, and we'll find you somebody who can be very helpful for you and can give you legal advice.
Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you for being here. Of course, go check it out over at mobilegrowthassociation.com. Under education, you're going to see what's coming up in Level Up Thursdays. And my personal thought here, knowledge is for sharing. So go out there, spread the word about Level Up Thursdays. Bring some friends in, have some fun, use social media to give us some questions. I asked a few here today, but always, if you see Level Up Thursday is coming up, send over your questions. We'll ask them. So until another Level Up Thursday, I'm your host, Peggy Ann Saltz. We're signing off, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, guys.